Wow, it's really cold out today. Hey look, a quarter! Amazing! I wonder how caribou manage to survive in the cold when I'm barely surviving here. Whoa! Where did you come from?
That doesn't matter. I'm here to tell you about the amazing caribou. When we talk about caribou, there are actually a few different subspecies that occupy slightly different environments. These subspecies of Rangifer tarandus include tarandus, which is mostly domesticated caribou, typically known as reindeer and is native to Eurasia, Groenlandicus, which is the barren land caribou, woodland or mountain caribou, which is caribou, Perii, which is the Peary caribou, which lives on Arctic islands, and Grantii, which is grass caribou, which lives in Alaska and the northern Yukon. These ones are the most famous for their massive migrations. And so for ease of discussion, and since these all have basically identical systems, we're not going to consider these subspecies distinct. In general, caribou live in the Arctic tundra, which is an extremely cold biome. It harbors low biodiversity with only simple vegetation due to limited drainage and permafrost, as well as a growing season of only 50 to 60 days. As such, many animals, including caribou, migrate, and therefore the community structure of this ecosystem fluctuates greatly. The Arctic is essentially a frozen desert, with average temperatures of minus 34 degrees Celsius during the winter and 3 to 12 degrees Celsius during the short summer, which allows the Arctic to bear life during that period. This biome receives only 15 to 25 centimeters of precipitation per year, which includes melting snow. As you can tell, water is pretty scarce and must be acquired from bogs, ponds, and snow for animals that drink water, such as caribou. In such a hostile environment, caribou must migrate between summer and winter ranges in order to find conditions that suit their needs. In the summer, they find places with plentiful and nutritious food, which helps them and their calves to survive the long winters. However, the summer ranges are not hospitable during winter, and so the caribou must move to where conditions such as tree cover, lichen availability, and snow depth are more ideal. But if you're wondering about how they stay warm, you'll want to know about thermal regulation. Caribou have multiple and robust ways of keeping warm in extremely cold temperatures. First, they are large and endothermic mammals. Endothermy means they produce their own body heat, which can be retained in order to stay warm. As with most mammals, they are homeotherms as well, which means they need to maintain a relatively constant body temperature to stay alive. As large mammals, caribou apply both Bergmann's and Allen's rules. Bergmann's rule states that larger-bodied animals tend to live in colder environments. This is because of a concept called thermal inertia. To help explain this, imagine we have a cake. I cut the cake in half. Now the total volume of cake has not doubled. I still have the same amount, but the surface area, or the area that I would have to ice if this was a cake that was iced all the way around, has increased. This is an example of a surface area to volume ratio. Large animals have more volume relative to surface area than smaller animals, and so heat dissipates out of their bodies and their metabolic core slower. In cold environments, this is beneficial. Caribou are also equipped with lots of other cool ways to stay warm. Probably the most interesting is their hair structure. Caribou molt their fur to accommodate different seasons, and their winter fur is the most robust. Each hair is hollow, which allows it to trap air and therefore maintain a boundary layer of warm air close to the skin. This hollow hair also helps when crossing bodies of water during migration by helping the caribou float. Adult caribou also have an undercoat of thin, woolly hairs for extra insulation. Effective insulation by fur also means that caribou don't need to eat as much in order to stay warm. Adult caribou have cooler legs than the rest of their bodies, which may prevent overheating in the summer. They can control blood flow to their legs and actually use countercurrent heat exchange, which we'll talk about later, to regulate temperature and prevent snow from melting on their legs, which would make them wet and even more cold. If not in transit, caribou will orient themselves so that the wind blows against their fur, which minimizes heat loss. Caribou also have compact bodies, small tails, and short ears. These features follow Allen's principle, which states that animals adapted to colder climates have shorter appendages than those adapted to warm climates. This also reduces surface area and thus the amount of heat that can be lost through the skin. You've heard me talk a lot about adult caribou, but what about the babies? While calves are a little bit different in their fur composition. Since they are smaller, they need to conserve heat even more fiercely. As such, they are almost completely covered in the hollow hairs of adults without the woolly undercoat. They also shiver violently upon birth in order to dry off quickly so that they do not lose as much body heat to evaporation. They also increase their heat production via non-shivering thermogenesis, which involves the metabolism of brown adipose tissue. This is stimulated by noradrenaline, but the calf's sensitivity to this hormone is reduced by the time they are 3 to 4 weeks old. There's one more amazing adaptation I want to tell you about. Caribou have evolved a special seashell-shaped nose, which is heavily supplied by blood vessels and boasts a vast surface area. This allows caribou to exploit the principle of minimum energy loss. Energy is dissipated in the form of friction, which creates entropy. But the caribou, get this, maintains a level of entropy to counter heat loss through the nose, and the individual as a whole loses minimal energy to the environment. Maintenance of a uniform entropy allows the caribou to lose less heat over time than if it did not do this. So, this is a diagram of the caribou's special nose. This is the nose closer to us, farther from its face and its eyes, and this is it closer in. So as air goes in the nose, in the sinuses, at first it encounters just a little bit of surface area, but here the caribou has a lot of special adaptations to maximize surface area, and this is covered in warm mucus, which is heated by the blood, and that mucus helps warm the air before it comes into the lungs so that the air will be ready for respiration inside the lungs, and it also helps moisten it up. And then as the air is coming out, the mucus will extract the moisture back out of the air so that the caribou doesn't lose as much moisture to the environment.
Thank you, Ursula. Very cool. That made me so happy. On that note, let's watch Happy Feet.
Se terminó nuestro amor divino. Mis amigos, les declaré, les diré que estoy seguro que es un hombre sin nada más, sin un señor con lágrimas. Debe decir, debe gritar, debe sentir, en la verdad, luché, gané, sobresalí,
I wonder how animals in the Antarctic stay warm.
Like penguins?
I like the amigos. How about Adelie penguins in particular?
Let me tell you. Okay, so to start off, penguins aren't native to the Antarctic. There are some penguin species who live in hot climates. However, for the purpose of this discussion, and because you asked, we'll talk about Adelie penguins, which are one of 2 species living in the Antarctic. Now, the Antarctic is a polar region around the South Pole, which is opposite to the Arctic region around the North Pole. So most of the Antarctic continent is permanently covered by ice and snow, leaving less than 1% of the land exposed. There are only 2 species of flowering plant, but there's a bunch of moss and liverworts that grow there. In the Antarctic, at the southernmost region, is Antarctica, home of the Adelie penguin. So Antarctica is the coldest, driest, and windiest continent out of all the continents. Most of Antarctica is a polar desert, and they only get an annual precipitation of about 200 millimeters, which is about 8 inches, and this only occurs along the coast. It only rains for about 30 days out of the whole year. Isn't that crazy? Anyways, the temperature in Antarctica has reached negative 89.2 degrees Celsius, although it's usually around negative 63 degrees Celsius. Now, living in the Antarctic and being marine endotherms, penguins are faced with all sorts of challenges. They need to be able to tolerate these very cold temperatures, meaning they're extremely sensitive to their environment. They have to dive to find food, and they even have to tolerate rain. Anyways, penguins stay warm by multiple different mechanisms, so let's dive right in. Penguins have feathers, which are used as insulation, and the insulation is a great way to control their thermoregulation. So they have a dense, smooth layer of feathers extending over all of their extremities, and these are effective in resisting ruffling and loss of insulation at high speeds. Their feathers also repel water, which helps them when they dive. The chicks also need special juvenile plumage under their down feathers in order to tolerate the rain. And so underneath their feathers or plumage, there's also a substantial adipose or fat layer in the winter. So basically this is blubber, and it's very similar to that of seals. So since penguins are divers, which you've already mentioned, it provides insulation during diving and also helps with insulation on land along with their feathers. And so this blubber also acts as a massive food store during the time that the adults are incubating and not feeding. So now that we've talked about what adaptations they have to stay warm, how exactly do they do it? Well, it's called countercurrent heat exchange using bene comitante. Okay, so countercurrent heat exchange is maintaining core heat within the animal by transferring heat from the afferent artery back to the efferent section of the vein. So basically, it's when two fluids are running close together, as in this fluid here and this fluid here, in opposite directions, allowing for transfer, such as this, which can either be for heat, solutes, or gases between the two fluids. So it's a highly efficient physiological system as it allows for heat to be retained where it's needed and not be sent all the way to the end of the limb. This countercurrent system allows for their insulation and blood layers to be effective. But another way that penguins can control their heat is that they huddle in large groups, and so this conserves heat because when all the penguins are together, the heat is being conserved between them, and this is what they do when it gets super windy and cold in the Arctic, so that their heat is just going between one another and not being lost to the environment. They also are known to bask extensively after diving, and this just assists the heat they lost during the dive.
Okay, that was epic.
Hey Ursula,
What?
is caribou respiration also affected by the cold?
Funny you should ask.
Caribou can be found at high elevations in biomes such as the alpine tundra and the Engelmann spruce subalpine fir zone. Spending summers at high altitudes allows caribou to avoid hot temperatures and parasites. At high altitudes, the air is thinner and it's harder for organisms to extract oxygen from the atmosphere. As such, caribou probably employ various methods of acclimating to this environment. Overall, the animals will need to increase their P50, and by that I mean increase their hemoglobin's affinity for oxygen. By doing this, they will also have to decrease the pressure of oxygen of their tissues to ensure that oxygen unloading is still efficient. They may also increase their hematocrit, or the concentration of red blood cells in the blood, allowing them to transport more oxygen throughout the body. However, if they do this too much, their blood will be too thick, and so they can only do it to a certain amount. Similarly, they may increase the concentration of hemoglobins in their blood by either shrinking their cells or activating specific genes. Caribou may also experience an increase in cardiac output, which would allow more blood to pass by their cells and therefore increase the opportunities for gas exchange. This is a diagram of a lung. Air comes in like this and goes out like this through the trachea. It pulls inside small chambers called alveoli, and here I have zoomed in and drawn one alveolus. These are lined by a net of thin capillaries, and I've drawn one capillary here. Blood in the capillaries releases its carbon dioxide from the hemoglobin and absorbs the new oxygen from the air. So the air comes in and it swirls around and mixes, which is why it's so inefficient. And then the blood will come, this is the hemoglobin, and it will release its carbon dioxide, and then it will accept the oxygen from the lungs and continue on through the body.
Interesting.
Yeah, but wait, penguins dive, don't they? How does the bird hold its breath underwater?
You're correct! Diving physiology is a huge part of penguin regulation. Here, let me show you. As I mentioned earlier, penguins need to dive to find food, which isn't a fast process. So they have many adaptations to help them hold their breath and maintain homeostasis while underwater. First, penguins are birds, which means that they use cross-current exchange for respiration. So basically, air is passing through air capillaries right here. So this is the inspired air, and this is the expired air, and it is moving this direction through the air capillary. And blood is moving through blood capillaries, and these capillaries are generally at right angles to each other. So this is the vein, and this is the artery. And as the blood is moving from the vein to the artery, they're also hitting the air. And so this is an inefficient system at one end, however efficient at the other. Because when you mix highly oxygenated blood and purely oxygenated, it is not good because this causes inefficiency. And so this mixing occurs when the deoxygenated blood from the vein will mix with the air, and then the blood becomes oxygenated after that, and this is why it's inefficient at this right angle. When they dive, it's a bit different. Their oxygen carrying capacity and blood volume are greater because they're diving birds. So when they're diving, myoglobin, which is a respiratory pigment kind of like hemoglobin, is used up very quickly, and muscles use less efficient anaerobic metabolic pathways. Their muscles can continue anaerobically for periods of time, therefore during the dive all the oxygen is sent to the heart and the brain, which obviously can't be anaerobic. So something else that happens is that their heart rate slows as the dive begins, and this is because they need to conserve as much oxygen to send to the brain as possible so that the length of the dive can be longer and in the long term more effective.
Wow, thank you for that in-depth explanation.
Haha, you're so funny.
Anyways, what other aspects of animal physiology are there?
How about water balance?
Oh yeah, caribou do that.
Amazing, tell me more.
As you've already learned, caribou live in an environment with very little precipitation, and cold temperatures cause water bodies to freeze. So, where do caribou get their water? Well, there are 3 sources of water for caribou: free water, preformed water, and metabolic water. Free water includes water that can be found in the environment, such as snow, lakes, streams. You get the idea. Preformed water is water present in the food a caribou eats, and metabolic water is water created as a byproduct of metabolic functions. Caribou's water needs also differ seasonally. In summer, mothers need extra water to support pregnancy and nursing their young. Calves also need water in order to grow big and strong for the winter. Luckily, these months are when bodies of water are not frozen over, so they can drink as much as they like. Plants also provide more water than you think, which helps caribou a lot when they can't find liquid sources of water, especially in the winter. Caribou may also resort to eating snow in the winter, but this can pose challenges because snow is very cold and may affect thermoregulation. Luckily, situations where caribou do not have access to water usually are not very metabolically demanding, so caribou can get by. Caribou spend a lot of time doing nothing, sitting around in forests, which isn't very metabolically expensive. And, like most terrestrial vertebrates, caribou also reabsorb water from fecal matter through the rectum.
What a wild explanation.
Yeah, but what about penguins?
I'm so glad you asked. Let me tell you. So, since penguins are seabirds, this means that they are hypoosmoregulators. And that's just basically a really fancy word for saying that they lose water and gain salt. So they gain salt by drinking it, and also it slowly leaches into their body due to them losing water. And so this does cause problems for them because too much salt and not enough water is obviously never a good thing. Luckily though, they have salt glands. So salt glands are where salt from drinking and from the slow leak into the body can be actively excreted. And these glands excrete salt as NaCl, or sodium chloride, at very high concentrations because there is so much salt leaving the body. They also have a very low pressure of sodium in their skin, which slows inward salt leakage as far as possible until the salt glands excrete it. So basically, penguins have hyposmotic body fluids, which is a challenge, but they have wonderful adaptations such as salt glands to help them deal with that. But what about nitrogenous waste?
Let me tell you about how caribou take care of that.
Okay.
Anyways, caribou excrete nitrogenous waste in the same way as many other terrestrial animals. Nitrogenous wastes are created by catabolism of amino acids and nucleic acids. Both these processes create the toxic molecule ammonia, which is often converted into ammonium, which has one more hydrogen. Ammonia is much too toxic to be retained in the body, so our caribou will invest energy and transform it into urea. Urea is less toxic than ammonia, highly soluble in water, but requires a moderate amount of water from the body to dilute, and it's a large molecule and is able to easily transfer through transporters in the cells. Urea is formed through the ornithine urea cycle, which transforms ammonium, carbon dioxide, and water into urea. As such, caribou are known as ureotelic, or animals that excrete urea. Although the use of urea over ammonia requires energy input and specialized physiology, it's worth it for terrestrial animals, such as the caribou, who do not have constant access to large volumes of water to dilute their urine with.
So, penguins excrete nitrogen as uric acid, meaning they are uricotelic. So this is uric acid right here. And so we have our urea that was converted from ammonia, and then we take allantoicase, allantoinase, urate oxidase, H2O2 and CO2, and then we get uric acid. And so this is the mode of nitrogen excretion for all birds. Now this is the reason mainly because birds don't have a bladder, as not having one helps in weight reduction. And so uric acid has a very low toxicity and only requires 1 milliliter of water per gram excreted, which is barely anything compared to ammonia and urea. And so this helps them with no bladder because uric acid requires very little water to excrete, and therefore a bladder isn't necessary. We aren't really sure why penguins excrete their nitrogen this way, because they don't fly, but I think it's because they lose so much water to their environment that they don't have that much left to use for nitrogen excretion.
Wait, isn't there an acid-base regulation in the blood? How do caribou do that?
Well, caribou's acid-base regulation system is pretty similar to other terrestrial mammals. And let me tell you how that works.
Caribou acid-base regulate much like any other mammal. They have mechanisms to maintain constant pH in their bodies, thus ensuring that their pressure of carbon dioxide, or PCO2, doesn't get too high. High PCO2 causes acidosis, which means becoming too acidic in the blood, but thankfully caribou can ensure this doesn't occur. By hyperventilating, they can drive PCO2 back down to normal levels. PCO2 can also become lower, and this is termed alkalosis. This is resolved by hypoventilation, which is the opposite of hyperventilation.
Wow, thanks for that. Penguins also acid-base regulate, but it's a little bit different than caribou, so let me tell you how it works.
Okay, the really good stuff about penguins is all related to their acid-base balance and diving. So, since penguins are divers, they experience acidosis when diving, and basically acidosis is just when the blood or the pH becomes very, very acidic. And so when I talked about their respiration, I mentioned that their muscles can function anaerobically during a dive. And so this is just that all their oxygen can go to where it's needed most, which is like their brain and their heart. And so the way their muscles function anaerobically is via lactic acid buildup. So after a dive, there's a large surge of lactic acid in the blood. And so basically this is due to an increased flow to tissues that were previously functioning anaerobically during the dive, such as muscles. So when the bird is diving, the blood picks up large amounts of lactic acid as it flows through the muscle tissue and is accumulated during the dive. And so due to this lactic acid buildup, the pH drops steadily during the dive, causing the acidosis. This also affects CO2 and oxygen blood content, with the oxygen blood content falling rapidly and the carbon dioxide blood content rising.
Diving is really cool.
Yep, you right.
You know what's cool about caribou?
What?
The ways that they sense and communicate with their environment.
Ooh, tell me about it.
As terrestrial mammals, caribou's senses are somewhat similar to our own. They see through similar eyes and they hear through similar ears. Caribou use their senses to identify food sources, avoid predators, and recognize conspecifics. Caribou also have an excellent sense of smell, which allows them to sniff out lichens and plants beneath the snow. Their excellent sense of smell also allows mothers to identify their young amongst others in the group. They can also smell the scents of predatory animals or simply unknown animals and objects. If a caribou feels threatened by the presence of a potential predator, they will jump in an excitation leap and secrete a chemical from the tarsal gland on their foot. This leaves a scent mark for other caribou walking over that spot, warning them that the predators have been spotted near there. Caribou have large eyes placed on either sides of the head, which allows them to have a large field of view and spot approaching predators, even in poor lighting. Caribou mothers are protective of their vulnerable calves, and so they may use various and interesting techniques to keep them safe from predators. This includes prompting the calf to run away when she senses danger, as well as luring predators away from the calf by making herself vulnerable. Sadly though, if a calf's mother dies, no one will take care of it and it will soon perish as well.
Wow, caribou are really cool.
Yeah, but what about penguins?
So penguins walk with an upright posture, and the flippers are usually held away from the body. When they walk through a colony, however, their posture is more slender because they may be walking through other members' territory. Whether or not they're in a colony, penguins are often pausing and looking around either for mates or for intruders. A fun fact about penguins is that sometimes they fight. This doesn't occur often, but when it does, it is due to one penguin making aggressive body contact with another. If the other penguin retaliates or fights back, then a fight occurs and sometimes even a chase ensues. A fight could also start when a penguin feels threatened, which is indicated by them undergoing various displays such as ruffling their feathers. Penguins will also sometimes have mini fights when defending their territories, but they never last long and are usually resolved quickly. Something else interesting about penguins is their ability to see underwater. They have softer lenses than normal, which allows muscles to squeeze them against the opening of the pupil. This makes their eyes bulge outwards into a rounded shape, which changes the shape of the lens and allows them to form sharp images. Their corneas are also much flatter than ours, and this allows them to see clearly on both land and in water.
Hi, I'm Ursula Dillon. We've had a lot of fun here today learning about the fascinating mechanisms that cold climate animals employ to stay warm in their environments. But before we go, Elouette and I would like to talk to you a little bit more about what this all means. One major trade-off for caribou is the process of migration. The reward is having access to a variety of environments which is necessary for the caribou's survival. For example, as I mentioned earlier, they will move to higher altitudes and forests in the summer to avoid getting too hot. However, these migrations are very energetically expensive and dangerous. Many caribou do not survive, as the large groups are excellent targets for predators. Although most individuals do survive simply because the predators can't kill everyone, there is a cost to these migrations.
So, penguins are highly specialized for swimming and diving, and therefore reflect regional oceanic variation more completely than other seabirds. They reflect changes in oceanographic productivity and human-induced changes in the environment, including fishing pressure, climate variation, and even oil pollution. Penguins also don't fly, so there's a trade-off or compromise between flying and diving. These adaptations include a fusiform body, upright stance, flipper-like wings, solid bones, and a reduced sternum.
Wow, caribou are so amazing. Thanks for telling me all about their amazing mechanisms.
Thank you for telling me about penguins. I feel like we've learned a lot today.
I agree.
Well, off I go.